And we're just starting the live stream now. Max, we're unmuted at the desk. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thank you for joining us today in today's event, Flexing the Grid, the Role of Demand Response in Quebec's Energy Ecosystem. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from fourth space, and we are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects that are in development here at the university. Today, we're running this event as a live streamed meeting, and so we welcome your comments and your questions with a raised hand or via the chat if you're joining us by Zoom. And for those of you here in the space, if you'd like to participate, just let us know and let us know by raising your hand, and we'll be sure to get a microphone to you for any questions. And with that, it's now my pleasure to hand it over to Mohammed Osman, PhD candidate in building engineering at Concordia University, as our moderator. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mohammed Osman. I am a PhD candidate with Intelligent Buildings and Cities Lab. And it's an honor to be your moderator today for critical discussion on flexing the grid, the role of demand response in Quebec energy ecosystem. We are at a historic crossroads. The discussion about electrifying everything from transportation to homes, even industrial sites, have never been more prominent. But this brings us to the essential question. Can our electric grid handle this increased demand? This brings us to why we are here today. The phrase flexing the grid in our event's title asks us to rethink the conventional meaning of flexibility. Flexing is not just about stretching or bending an entity, in this case our power grid, to adapt to new requirement. It is also about demonstrating what we are capable of, unlocking the latent potential, and using our combined skills to strengthen and adapt our grid. So we are honored today to have a panel of experts from both academia and industrial sectors. They will offer a comprehensive look at the concept of demand response, sharing their knowledge, research, and practical experience to help us better understand the future role of demand response in Quebec energy landscape. So today we have Dr. Mohamed Ouf, Assistant Professor at Concordia University, Mr. Frédéric Pelletier, Head of Cost and Pricing at Hydro-Québec, Mr. Jess Burgess, Principal Consultant and Demand Response Lead at Econolair, and Professor Parag Gunai, Associate Professor at Carleton University. So without further delay, I would pass to Mohammed to introduce the topic.
Thank you, Osman. Just give me a second while I share the screen. Just have a very quick slide deck just to explain why we're here today. So as Mohammed mentioned, I am an assistant professor in building engineering at Concordia, and our work is mainly about investigating occupant building interactions in different contexts. And the reason why we're hosting this panel is part of the bigger decarbonization strategies that are becoming laws within Canada and mandates that target net zero GHG emissions by 2050. This sort of translates into electrification in a lot of cases in two main sectors, being the buildings and transportation sectors. So more and more EVs are going to be on the streets, and that also translates into charging in our buildings, as well as building electrification, and that's all about the switch to cold climate heat pumps. So switching our fuel sources for heating into electric ones. And with all of this, there is a potential side effect that I think needs a lot more investigation, which is the increased electricity demand that we will be facing. We're already starting to see some of this. So if you look at the news in the past year, in 2022, for example, Quebec broke the records for peak demand twice in January. Those two records were also broken again this year in February of this year, and it seems that this trend will keep increasing as we move forward. So there needs to be something done to sort of deal with these peaks. And some of the solutions immediately that would happen would either entail importing electricity that is much more expensive, and in a lot of cases also not as clean as our hydro electricity. There has to be potentially investment in energy storage or investment for larger capacity or increasing the capacity of the grid, and also all of that is has its own downsides. So one of the other solutions that utilities are looking for is demand-side management, which I'll let Jess explain a little bit more about, but just in a nutshell, it's more about having programs that are designed by utilities to encourage customers to modify their level and pattern of electricity usage. However, their uptake is still a bit slow. Not that many places in Canada still have these, and in general, they're relatively quite new. In Quebec, we have 3 programs, so we're a little bit more well-positioned that sort of fall under the umbrella of DSM. And within Quebec, the number of participation is a little over 200,000 out of the 4 million customers, so there's still potential for growth there. We did a survey on this over the last year, last year and into 2023, where we surveyed people in Quebec in general, and as expected, a number of people from our survey that have not participated in any program was the largest. There's a lot more to it, but I'm just going to briefly mention some of the highlights. We did ask why you haven't participated or what are the perceived barriers. And for a big portion of people, they're actually not aware of any of these programs, while some others mentioned low monetary gains or inconveniences, some of them. We did do some more investigations on how people participate for those that participated. So what sort of contextual factors, like having children at home or working from home and whatnot, how that affects how they interact with some of these DSM programs. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that during the panel today anyway. And in addition to this, we've also been doing some work with Barak here, with Dr. Gunai from Carleton, where we looked at the actual data from smart thermostats in Ontario in this case, so it's a bit of a different context, but we were also looking at what happens during these events. So in some cases, like you can see here, usually those peak demand events happen for a 3-hour period. This is a chart showing how it should be or how it should look like if no overrides or if no occupant interactions taken place. But we did see in some of the data as well that there would be overrides that happen 1 hour or even less into the event. So you start and then the set points change for the thermostat, but then people tend to override that. There could be multiple reasons for this, or on the other hand, people participate fully for the full 3 hours, but then there's a rebound. So after the event is over, in this case, it was cooling because again, it's a different context, but they actually cool a little even more than what they used to before the event. And these are all some of the questions that we're investigating more on, like what triggers these behaviors and if we can classify or categorize customers into different groups based on how they interact. So this brings us today to this very interesting group that you'll hear from that deals with these programs from different aspects. And I'll just move it first to Jess next to me here that will introduce some of the concepts of what we'll be talking about, set the floor, and then we'll move on with the questions.
Great, thanks, Mohammed. Really happy to be here. My name is Jess Burgess. I'm a principal consultant at Econolaire, and I lead our grid flexibility practice. So I've had the opportunity to be involved in research projects, studies, and evaluations of a number of demand response and other grid flexibility projects around Canada for the last 3-4 years. Looking forward to chatting with everyone on this panel about that today. What I wanted to do just quickly at the start is to set the table in terms of what we're talking about when we're talking about demand response at a very basic level. My sense is probably everybody in this room and in the virtual room maybe has that background, but just to make sure. So Mohammed talked about the concept of demand-side management. And when I think of demand-side management or DSM, there's kind of 3 big buckets that I think of. One being energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is, or has been for the last probably 20, 30 years, the bread and butter of demand-side management programs across North America. We've been doing it the longest. It's been bringing in lots of savings. energy efficiency is excellent and has been setting our grids up for success for a long time. Distributed energy resources. So now we're talking about whether it's solar photovoltaics mounted on your home or battery storage. These are resources that might generate or store energy in a disaggregated way, so not from a centralized power plant. And then demand response, what we're here to talk about today. And the key distinction that I want to make in between energy efficiency and demand response. So when I think about energy efficiency, you might think about changing out a light bulb or a new clothes washer or a new chiller in a building like this. It's a bit of a simplification, but when we think about what's going to happen as a result of that, that's going to be saving energy kind of regardless of time, right? Energy efficiency is going to save a certain number of kilowatt hours per year. We're not particularly focused on exactly when those kWh are being saved. Whereas demand response, what we're talking about today, is requesting customers or participants to take a specific action to reduce their electricity demand at very specific points in time. So energy efficiency, not very concerned with time, really focused about saving energy overall over the course of a day or a month of a year. Whereas demand response, much less focused about actually saving energy over the course of the day, but really about achieving specific reductions at certain minutes or hours during the day. And that's all I want to say about that. I don't think I need the rest of the slides though. I'll go ahead and hand it back. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jess, Mohammed, for these informative presentations. So I would also go to Frederick and Burak. Could you also give us a brief overview on your role in your organization and how it is related to demand response?
Well, at Quebec,
I'm not sure that one's on.
green. Okay, good. Sorry about that. At Quebec, I'm responsible for any rate design on the distribution level and the transmission level. One of our mandate is to take into account the supply, the equilibrium between the supply and the demand. We have rates to recover our costs, but we do have some options that goes above that and are designed to help HQ to manage its peak demand. So what we have done in the past couple of years is to introduce two peak time options. The one is winter credit options. It's called, this is its name, and this is a peak time rebate. So every time a customers reduce any kWh, we give him a credit of 50 cents per kilowatt hour. This is the carrot. There is no risk. There is the only thing that customers might expect at the end of the winter is have a credit on his bill. The other option is Flex D, which is a rate. So in counterpart of fixing a higher rate for peak events for 100 hours per winter, the customers receives a lower price of peak, but at the end of the winter, the Flex D is calibrate neutral with its base rate, which is rate D. So there is two kind of options. One is the carrot, the other one is the bat, and typically people respond better with the bat than the carrot. So
we will go back to how people respond to this. Yeah. But, yeah, thank you. So Burak, you want to?
Sure. In relation to demand response, what we do at Carleton is actually one one thing that we've been working on is actually automation of demand response. So using the building automation system in commercial buildings, we're trying to connect the in our case in Ontario, it's the IESO peak forecasts, and then try to adopt the way the building responds to the demand charges. And we try to do that in a smarter way, because if you don't do it in a smart way, before the term ends, the peak might actually come back. Like before even the peak period ends, you might actually hit that setback temperature, and then there may even be a larger demand before that window. So we try to use various machine learning techniques and data-driven strategies to optimize how we do that. And when it comes down to residential case, I work very closely with Mohammed. And what we do in that case is we try to understand how people use their thermostats, and ideally, in the long run, we want to develop occupant-centric control strategies. So each home, given its uniqueness of envelope, given its uniqueness of HVAC systems, and people's preferences, we're trying to have personalized direct load control sequences sent to each smart thermostat. So that's essentially where we are basically.
Okay, so as we're speaking mainly about Quebec today, Frederick, you recently published an interesting paper on the status quo of different dynamic pricing in Quebec. Actually, my first question is, when we talk about dynamic pricing and demand response in general, are we speaking about the same thing, or just here in Quebec we are speaking about the same thing, and how these impact the customer?
I think that there is a the difference is not quite large. In some jurisdictions, you have dynamic pricings in the way that price varies on an hourly basis. In Quebec, we don't have that because we have much hydro, wind, and base load are very stable over time. But how we can make customers to participate to our response is that by price signal. So as I mentioned earlier, we developed two options with strong price signal that encourage customers to move their consumption from the peak time to the off-peak time. So we use the rate design to encourage good behavior in the peak consumption.
Okay, and how is the status quo here in Quebec now? How is the status quo for these programs in Quebec now?
By state of school, you have the response?
The situation,
or,
yeah, as a
okay.
participant.
So like Mohamed said earlier, we have more than 200,000 people over on those options. The peak projection on our supply plan is 226 megawatt at peak. So this is a kind of contribution of 0.6 to 0.9 per customer, which is relatively good because in Quebec we have, since we have electric space heating, it's about 5 kilowatt per home on average. So this is quite good because it's 20% in peak projection. So
okay, that's great news. So Jess, you work with different utilities in North America. Can you give us some case studies on or a case study where demand response was significant or has a significant impact?
Is this one? Yeah. Yeah, so as you said, my work is primarily outside of Quebec, doing some work in Nova Scotia right now, the Yukon, and recently in BC. And You asked a minute ago about the distinction between dynamic pricing and demand response, and I might start there a little bit as a jumping off point, because in some ways demand response it's been around for a long time in certain forms. A lot of utilities, I'm sure Quebec and Hydro-Quebec have been doing this a long time, but will have something, maybe they'll call it an interruptible rate. Maybe they'll just have specific contracts with large users, often industrial facilities. And when they see a peak coming a week ahead, a day ahead, something like that, they'll essentially, you pick up the phone, you have an agreement in place with that facility, and they might shed a certain amount of load during that upcoming peak. And the great thing about large industrials, they might be able to shed 500 kW, they might be able to shed 10 megawatts, depending on the size of the facility and their process and what they're doing at that time. So now, if we're thinking about at the residential scale, we're not going to get 10 megawatts from a home. It's going to take a big chunk of the city to get that kind of load reduction. But so that's one type of demand response that has been in place for a very long time, 15, 20 years in a lot of jurisdictions. I think what I am seeing and what we're seeing in our work at Econolaire overall across Canada, I think the value of peak demand, of peak kilowatts has been increasing relative to the value of say annual kilowatt hour savings pretty dramatically over the last 3 to 4 years. I think 3-4 years ago, energy efficiency was where most of the utility DSM budgets in Canada were. The tens of millions of dollars for spending. It was about go save annual kilowatt hours. What we've really seen shifting since 2018, 2019 or so is the value of those peak KW going up quite a bit, and recently I think eclipsing those kWh in a lot of cases, such that those utility program designs are starting to put much higher value and much more focus on reducing the peak KW. And that's in response to a lot of issues that you raised earlier. We're decarbonizing our grids, we're shifting loads that used to be gas or transportation, we're bringing those onto the grid, adding a lot of load. Now we need flexibility to deal with those higher peaks. So as that's happening, we're seeing, as Frédéric spoke about for Quebec, we've seen some really interesting new pricing pilots in Nova Scotia. I think Frédéric mentioned just before, BC is starting to look at this in terms of pricing, and then I think enabled in some really important ways by internet and communications technologies, we're starting to see demand response that makes sense and is economical, not just at the scale of those large industrial facilities, but down into homes, working with thermostats in commercial buildings or even smart thermostats in homes, as Barack was talking about. So I know that there's work going on in BC, in the Yukon, in Nova Scotia, and in Ontario right now for that kind of really disaggregated, much smaller scale in terms of the individual loads, but much higher volume in terms of numbers of participants.
Okay, that's great. So I would like to turn to our academic panelists also, as this is emerging field for like moving the demand response to residential sectors. So in academia always look for the future. So do you think there are any particular aspects of demand response that is understudied or could benefit from more academic investigation? Mohammed? Yeah.
Okay, I'll go for it. In terms of investigations or like research onto these aspects, I think, well, there's multiple things. I mean, the one thing that we've noticed, I think, as Barak and I were working on this and in general as researchers on that point is, how do we, like one of our big topics, for example, in research is occupant comfort and how occupant satisfaction and their well-being and so on is investigated, modeled, and so on. And in a lot of cases, I don't think, the design of a program on such a large scale takes these points into account as much. There is a little bit of maybe, okay, pricing is like the major tool I think that people think about, but we do find that there is more to it, that you can better understand preferences of people, better understand even the specific context, especially if we're starting to go into those larger volume, numerous houses and so on. Every house is a bit unique, not just in the characteristics of its people, but also the characteristics of the house itself. Like some houses would be able to store heat a little bit more than others. So the response of people there would be different. So the one direction, at least I think that we're looking into, is that nowadays, with the availability of data from a lot of these customers, if you may, there obviously are some privacy questions when you talk into these points, but if we do have some large scale, aggregate level, big data that can tell you a little bit more about how people are participating in those programs and sort of, tweak some of them, have a little bit more options that suit different kinds of people that we can observe. I think there's more investigations to be done to bring occupants more into the loop of improving participation rates. That's one big aspect, I'd say. And I think along with that, goes the automation of these processes and so on. And I think the data or the infrastructure that we have right now in terms of ICT or information technology and communication can allow that, and can allow the utilities to be a bit more responsive, and like you sort of see how people are doing, and then you can gamify it, or like make it a bit more interesting and unique to different people. I think that's one aspect of it.
Yeah. So Barak, you want to add for that?
I mean, Mohammed covered the bulk of it, but I think there's a fine balance between automation and doing things in a manual way, and we really need to understand what works in terms of doing demand response automatically. As Mohammed showed that in that thermostat example, for example, people can make overrides. People and the primary reason they do that, those types of overrides in Ontario, is that discomfort and lack of adequate financial incentives in the program to trigger. So I think there's need for interdisciplinary research. I don't think the pure automation will be the complete answer, but automation behind the meter solutions will actually play a major role in the success of demand response. But we just need to work with people like right. But so that's my 2 cents on this, basically.
Yeah, true. So
can I jump in briefly? I think the point that you raised there, Barak, is one that I'm really interested in, and where I think a lot more study could be valuable. As we're getting down to smaller, like home-sized loads, my house just isn't worth very much in terms of what I can contribute to the grid. If I'm going to bring, Frédéric, you mentioned like maybe 600 watts or something like that, that might be worth $25 a year, some little incentive, but that's probably not enough to motivate me to go take action and be part of the program. And in order for those small loads to be meaningful, they need to be scaled very dramatically. So how do we overcome that issue of motivation when the traditional motivator that we've used, the incentive check, doesn't really get it done?
Yeah, I would turn this to Frédéric actually, because like, is just the money incentive is the main incentive, or there are different approaches that...
It's a good question. Just to follow up on your quote, in Quebec we have the benefits, or it depends on the which point of view you look at it, but our rates are very low compared to other jurisdictions in North America. So $25 per year, yeah, it might be not good enough to implement some new things to your home. But when you look at San Francisco or New York or other things like that, you see that every kWh that you shift from peak to off peak will result in a good credit on your bill. But to answer your question, Aspen, well, you know that people can respond to the credit or the amount that you expect to have on your bill, but some people might implement amelioration to their home for because they think that it's greener to do that, or for non-economic reason. So they think that if they put some solar on their roof, they will participate much larger to the decarbonization. So it depends on what you're looking at to participate in those programs.
So, yeah.
Yeah, add something. I think incentives probably should need to be complemented by tools that nudge people in the right direction. So, for example, I'm a Hydro-Quebec customer as well, and the day before a peak event, I get this notification that says, there's this peak event at 6 a.m. So, do I want to wake up on a Saturday morning at like 5:30 or just? But if you can actually somehow motivate people in the right way to do the right things, for example, if you can give an estimate of the cost savings, if you can actually change your behavior, and really 50 cents per kilowatt hours is not that negligible considering how many hours that you can actually have them. Or maybe comparing your performance to your neighbors might be another point of source of motivation. I think it's possible, but then there's actually obviously the incentive side of things, which is the cash benefit, and for commercial buildings, again from an Ontario perspective, for large clients. Just as an example, Carleton University pays $10 million per year as electricity bills, and $8 million is only for the top 5 hours. And the remaining 8,555 hours is only $2 million. So, the energy manager runs around to turn off chillers and stuff because basically there is a real payback. So incentive, obviously the magnitude of the incentive probably cannot go to that scale in residential case, but there should be probably some nudging mechanisms here and there to push people in the right direction.
This is a very good point, because when we implement the dynamic pricing at Hydro-Quebec, we do add in our customer service a tool that compares what could be your bill at rate D, flex D, or winter credit option. And following your load profile, your last year load profile, we can estimate how much money you can save on your bill. And after that, following which one of the options you choose, you have access to advices from HQ that says, if you want to maximize your savings, focus on your space heating, focus then on your water heating. So this is kind of tool that we have. And finally, as I mentioned before, the winter credit option is a non-risk option. It goes well with low-income customers, which fees $25 for low-income customers. It's quite a big chunk.
Do you also offer a way to compare my consumption to my neighbors, as Parag said?
Yes, we do have a tool that compares how, when you fill a questionnaire and how many people lives in the department or the house, what kind of house do you have a garage, something like that. And when you fill that form, after that, with your load profile, you are labeled as big customers, low customers, and something like that. And compared to a profile that is similar with other in the Quebec province, you see where you are spot with your low profile.
And did you see that this is impacted the customer or the way they behave? When they
I
know,
don't
like, okay,
have
I'm in,
the last numbers, but I think that a lot of people did the form. So I think that this is popular, and people and following that as the same thing with the rate comparison tool. You have advice to pass from the red zone to the yellow zone or the green zone.
okay.
I just want to add one more point, but I think these are all great points that were raised about, the tools to show you what needs to be done, or like it's a bit more individualized in that sense. And I mean, some of that speaks to gamification in a sense, or like sort of putting you in a competition. So it's not just about the monetary incentives, but there's more you could do. I think one thing that I've felt for myself, at least as a participant in one of these programs, is as Barak mentioned, the whole point of, I get a notification or an email that there will be a peak event tomorrow at 6 a.m. It usually starts, I think. And, if I actually did the investment to get a smart thermostat to try to automate some of this manually. Doesn't, like, sometimes it works, sometimes it's, I forgot or whatever, but I feel like if there isn't a way to make it easier, I think there is one program with Hydro in Quebec, or sort of like the smart thermostats that are offered by Hydro-Quebec that can make it easier to participate. But for me, I feel like if that's a bit more broader, like with that notification, just a question of, would you like to participate or not? And just, click yes, and it takes care of some of the aspects. I feel like some of that is easier. And before I had like a thermostat that you could control from anywhere. It was even more difficult. There were times where I'd go to work, or like I'm outside of the house for whatever reason, or for people that might have a cottage or something. If you don't have access to something to change it, I feel like that, just it becomes, oh, I forgot, and there's nothing you can do immediately. So I think some level of automation on that might make things easier. Yeah, but anyway, that's my point on that.
Yes, you wanted to.
Just to the automation point, we're seeing, I can think of, well, at least in BC and the Yukon right now, there are residential demand response pilots that are taking a direct load control approach, where the utility, in some cases via a third party, but when they send a peak notification, it's along the lines of what you're suggesting. In some cases, they might not even send a notification to the participant that there's a peak. They might simply reach out and turn down their smart thermostat to a certain set point, usually 1 or 2 degrees. The idea being, let's not impact comfort in any way. The ideal peak event in a direct load control scenario is the peak event that no one knows happened, right? We can get 200 watts, 400 watts, something like that by reaching out, turning down these thermostats. Water heating is, I think a lot of people are looking at water heating as kind of the silver bullet here, because if you think about how a water heater works, if we're thinking about a demand response event that might be 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 hours, If you turn off or turn down someone's water heater, and that's a well-insulated water heater with a significant tank, they might go through that peak event, use that water, the water stays warm, they have enough in their tank, they never realize that their water heater has been turned off, and you can get 350, 400 watts from a standard residential water heater in a direct load control type of situation. So I believe all of the activities that we've seen right now are at the pilot scale. They're, 1,000, a couple thousand participants at a time. But these are starting to happen in more and more jurisdictions across Canada, and the technology is fairly proven. So it's a really interesting development in terms of how do we engage at that high volume, low impact level.
Yeah. And you evaluated different programs in North America. Did you see like a different approach or like out of the box approach from one of the utilities in engaging
I still think of direct load control as being pretty out of the box, having been in energy efficiency and DSM for 15 years or so, where it is very, we're asking people to buy in and to contribute to the green transition, and we're giving them some incentives for their trouble. But with direct load control, as I said, the ideal is a scenario where, I as the customer or participant, I'm aware, I sign up, I sign a contract, maybe I get a smart device or something like this. Someone comes and installs the communicating technology on my thermostat or on my water heater. But then after that, I'm hands off and I might never know. And frankly, I don't really want to know. And so to me, that's pretty new, out of the box kind of thinking. Beyond that, in terms of engagement strategies, I guess that's where my question earlier came from, is I think we need some new strategies for engaging people in these types of programs. I mentioned that, we're seeing pretty good results at the pilot scale, at the scale of maybe 1,000 homes in a given jurisdiction. But I think there's a really important question. Well, did we just get the 1,000 people who were most excited about saving energy, and the other 4 million or whoever's there, they have no interest and they're not going to participate, or their results are not going to be as good? How do we get everyone else aware of this opportunity, interested, and I think another important question is willing to give up some degree of control of the devices in our homes, right? Which I think can potentially feel fairly intrusive if not handled really carefully.
Frederick, do you want to maybe answer this question for Jess? Okay, yeah. So Barak, you work a lot with smart buildings, and as Jess said, I'm Mohammed. So do you think that this technology can be like the silver bullet that we are looking for, like for commercial and also for residential buildings?
So I guess just to verify that I understood the question right. So the technology, like the potential of the smart building technology on the, I mean, basically right now, most, no, I wouldn't say most, but lots of buildings, lots of large clients are, they have building automation systems that are on the internet, and tomorrow, if they want to, they have the capacity to really implement an automated solution to shed their loads. And the technology is there. It's just basically there are lots of, I don't really know a single building BMS vendor that actually has a off-the-shelf product that actually the BMS actually has this plugin that as soon as you install, it has this capability to make two-way communication with the utility provider, and that I think that would be really good. like we have the backbones of it. That's the potential, like the telemetry that we can offer, the information exchange that can take place between the grid and the user. Is just we don't really have. I don't think, maybe I'm missing. I'm not a practitioner. I'm a PN, but I'm not a practicing engineer. That's the tricky part. But maybe I'm missing something. But yeah, that we have the technology, but I don't think we have the capacity, but the technology is not there. And then for
connecting the commercial buildings to the demand response, you mean?
Yes, yeah. And for residential case, I mean, there are lots of smart building, smart thermostats out there. The trick is, like, what's the business model for them? So they probably need to work with the utilities, and there needs to be an incentive program that comes with it. And you know, last week we only noticed that there's like some incentive programs are, you know, this is live, I guess, recorded on YouTube. To be careful about us. But like, for example, there are some programs in Ontario that gives people, like, you know, $75, $100, and then if you buy a smart thermostat, and the idea is that it comes with these pre-installed DR capabilities that the local utilities can actually, you know, make direct load control. But there's, like, with basically a basic time use pricing, fixed time of use pricing in Ontario, there's basically no incentive for people to keep that. And as soon as they got the thermostat installed, they just basically opt out from the direct load control program. So that's actually a, you know, horrible use of public money, because you pay people to buy that product, and you know, they don't use it correctly. Yeah.
It's an interesting point, because one of the loophole that we might have is the energy literacy, because people don't know the difference between power, capacity or power, and energy. They focus, like, I remember your first name, sorry. Jess said before, the focus was on energy efficiency, which is easier to understand from customers, but what is peak demand? What is capacity? People don't realize what they can do to shed their load. We had a discussion last year about, do we have to build demand in residential customers? People don't know that if they start their dryer, washing machine, dishwasher, and above that space heating, they will get their peak load, but they don't know that. So literacy is a very good component of, or a very big issue when you have to interest people in the load management.
That's a really interesting point. I remember having a conversation with a demand response program manager at BC Hydro 4 or 5 years ago, and they were just starting residential scale demand response pilots at the time. And she said, BC Hydro has been doing a great job with energy efficiency for 15 or 20 years. We've been educating our market. Everybody understands the core concepts. And now we're bringing out a peak demand program, and everybody's doing the wrong thing. They're saving kilowatt hours, and they're either not impacting or negatively impacting our peaks. And they understood that they needed to really change their education and promotion, and like you said, energy literacy efforts to really focus on demands, because it is a really importantly different kind of topic.
Mohammed, you work more on occupant behavior, and now we see that there is big problem with that awareness, and then how this awareness are affecting the behavior of the people. Like, what do you see is the main challenge
of like educating people, or
educating people?
I mean, honestly, it's not necessarily my feel. I mean, I think it was a bit summed up in a sense that there is that lack of awareness, and I don't know how, like, you know, I think I would look at it a little bit more like, you know, as an engineer, we're you know, Barak and I were always looking at this as well from like data perspective, you know, just like look at the thermostats and the set points and how they changed, and that's how we try to understand behavior in a sense. We are starting, like, you know, with you actually, that survey, that we're trying to understand a little bit more, you know, and the findings were similar to what we've talked about. Like, I mean, almost half of the participants or the people that we surveyed over this past few months, you know, did not know anything about these programs. I think a lot more people, there were some questions asking, what do you do when you do a peak demand, like when you get a peak demand notification? And it was interesting that half of the people would say, you know, turn up the heating or turn it down. It's like almost evenly split. So I think there is some interesting things that we've observed that just indicate that people don't know what to actually do. That speaks to education and literacy programs. Now, I'd say that's not necessarily my expertise per se. It's, you know, there's probably more people that are more into how to design information campaigns, or like, you know, sort of like the social aspects of like how to engage with people and so on. I think I think what we can observe is that this is definitely needed a lot in order for this to work. And this is what we're observing, but I think, you know, the design of those and who takes care of that, is that the utilities, you know, mandate, or is that someone else's mandate? I'm not sure, but I think that's something that needs to be addressed from what we see.
So, Frederick, how does the utility address this awareness problem during the designing of the programs or during managing the program?
How can we address the lack of understanding? Well, this is a very good question. I think that marketing campaigns helps. I think that we had some TV spots on last spring to be careful with your air conditioning, and soon we will have some spots for be careful with your space heating. So I think that the more information that people can have, the more they will be interested in make actions in their energy consumption. And I think that, as I mentioned before, the Quebec province has the lowest electricity price. So the response to that signal is not quite good, because people, even they say that this is expensive, but when we compare it with other jurisdictions, we are farthest the lowest. So there is no incentive for people when they see the bottom line of their bill that, okay, that's okay, this is the same thing as last year. I do not think.
Yeah. You think also like the way the rate is designed is a bit difficult for people to understand?
Yes. When this is only a bunch of people that understands very well their domestic or residential bill. But when we compare our rate structure with other in North America, we have one of the simplest in the North America jurisdiction. So this is not me that says that. This is consultants. This is people that we work with. So it's only a two-part tariff, just access charge and progressive energy prices. That's it. So people have to make some efforts to understand well how this is constructed to better respond to the pricing that rate has as a rate structure.
I just wanted to chime in quickly on the education question, because I remember that both of the last two quarterly newsletters that I've received from HQ, the headline has been about peak demand in both cases. So it's happening.
It's happening.
I just do want to add something because I remembered something recently, and I gave a presentation that talked about yes, like some of these aspects I think that we were discussing today, and in some cases actually I saw people that do understand, you know, what's the issue with peak demand and so on, but there's actually some people that are that have some hesitancy, not because of the lack of information, but especially with direct load control about the, you know, the privacy or like the big government and like, or they're like, I'm not, you know, no matter how much they pay me, like someone would say that, like, you know, I'm not gonna let them take over. You know, so like, and it was some like aggressive arguments in that line, which, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a solution for it, but I think it's something to also keep in mind that not everybody is keen on, you know, participating and doing their part, and they do have some, whether, you know, you want to call it valid or invalid concerns on, you know, essentially some government-based utility having information on their usage patterns and their so that is another issue that I think we would like to investigate more, but it's something I recalled.
So
Oh, I was just going to say the cybersecurity aspect is a really important and meaningful piece. I mean, when we're sharing control of devices in our homes and in our buildings, there's just the trust factor of sharing that control with your utility. I mean, your utility already has pretty significant control because they have the switch, but then just by creating that pathway, we're opening up the opportunity for piracy and security issues as well. That, I mean, I think maybe some people are overly concerned about, but I've spoken with experts as well who raise very legitimate concerns on that side.
okay, so we speak a lot about the problems, I think. So like just you evaluate different problems, like how do you evaluate the success or a successful program? Like by number of participants, the peak that they reduce, something else?
That's a great question. Typically in our role as evaluators, we won't set the success criteria. Typically the criteria for whether the program is successful or not will be set between the utility program administrator, maybe their regulator, maybe some third parties. But those are, I mean, the factors that you raise, how many people are participating, how much energy are participants saving during peak hours or during peak events. That's, and then often what are the participant bill impacts? Is participating in this saving them money? Is it costing them money? Or is it bill neutral? I think these are very common metrics for success. So as I said earlier, what we've mostly seen so far in terms of the residential scale direct load control types of programs, they're at the pilot scale. So participation is a meaningful metric, but we're not at the point of sort of thinking about it at a population level. And we raised some of those questions earlier about once we do, get beyond thinking about these questions in terms of a couple thousand homes at a time and thinking about, okay, can we engage half of the homes in the province in something like this? The scale of the participation challenge is going to go way up. In terms of the technical success criteria, the programs we've seen so far have generally been very successful. For the most part, there've been some issues here and there, but for the most part, the technology is robust and proven. You see opt-outs sometimes, but not overall on a wide scale. And the utilities that we've worked with have been very proactive in terms of their marketing and promotion and messaging to participants to deal with opt-outs. And so pretty consistently, those programs are hitting targets in terms of, they might be targeting 500 watts or, a really ambitious program that was looking at space heating and water heating, and EVs maybe might be looking at getting a kilowatt or more from a home. What we're seeing is mostly those programs delivering on expectations.
Fred, you want to add to this, like how the utility evaluate if their program is successful?
Yeah, you mentioned that jurisdiction are on pilot way. The dynamic options that we have is now on full scale. So this is open to everyone that want to participate to our demand response. This is, the last winter was the first year with full scale, and we had a I don't remember, but quite 40,000 people, new customers on that rate. So for a total of more than 200 megawatts of peak reduction. Just to mention that our peak load is 40,000 megawatt on February. So this is quite a good.
And this made the expectation of Quebec.
It was on expectations. Since we have now it was our fifth winter, I think, fourth or fifth winter, and we have seen over the past years that the contribution was remainly stable over time. So this is as I said before, 0.6 to 0.9 kilowatt per customers. So we know that if we enhance the number of customers, we could reach our goals in peak reduction with the two options.
So
I was just going to say, I saw we've gotten one or two questions come in over the chat. Just so that we can let folks know when. Is there a time when
we
we're
will
gonna
have
shift to this?
at the end of the event like 15 minutes for audience questions.
Great. So if you sent questions in, we're going to get to you.
Yeah. So like we spoke about transition from pilot to larger scale. So I would like to ask our academic panelists, what do you think we need to transfer what is done on lab scale to a real application? Like what do you need from the industry, and vice versa, what the industry need from academia to build on these capacities that you said we have already?
Data, lots of data, actually. I mean, I think, like, personally, what I really need is that being able to model occupant behavior from the point of, you know, like whether someone will accept you know, demand automated demand response signal, or whether they would actually manually adjust their energy usage voluntarily. To be able to model that, it actually depends on multiple factors, and one of them being is, you know, what's the level of tolerance of thermal comfort, and, you know, all these indoor environmental quality related factors. That's one variable, and the other variable is, you know, how much incentive, and we probably need like different types of, like, obviously there will be we need to have a model that can actually represent the population behavior that not only includes the indoor environmental quality as an input to the model, but as well as things like the incentive magnitude and the pricing signal. And basically, the more we understand how the populations would react, the better I think we will start building better programs, and more effective programs in the long run. And so I guess it kind of contradicts with what you said, but, you know, as people want to, you know, obviously protect the data or privacy concerns, as academics, we actually need abundance of data to be able to do our research, basically.
Yeah, Mohammed.
If I may add, I mean, I think Rak covered it pretty well in terms of the need for data, but just to clarify, I mean, the data exists anyway. I think it has to be handled with care, and I think there's a lot of ways to anonymize a lot of this information, even aggregate at some point to make it easier. But I do agree that you know, I think because both of us are in that field in general, that we're very interested in, you know, creating a good representation of how people respond to these programs and how people participate, like sort of the agent-based models, which, you know, sort of personify, or like creating hypothetical populations and rolling out some of these programs. And once we have this information, the beauty about modeling is, you know, that would be able to test a lot more scenarios that don't have to be piloted with as many people. So I think that's one key part that could, you know, sort of improve our understanding and the design of programs. But I think, yeah, it needs a lot of close work with utilities. And, yeah.
And what does the utility need from research?
This is when I heard you mention earlier with how to monitor or to understand consumer behaviors, but on the other side, they have to know more about their consumption. They know about their weight of reducing their peak demand. So this is a kind of vicious circle, because when you put a measure, people change response to that. You take that, re-put it in the model, new ways to consume or to shed their load. So this is a perpetual cycle that comes up with those things.
Yes.
I'm a consultant, and consultants don't need anything from anybody. But what I'm really curious about, especially from the academic side, is, as we've talked about earlier, I think we've got demand response fairly well figured out for the industrial sector, right? It's been working for a long time. And even if for some reason we run into problems with that model, there's so much value there for a customer that can shed 1 to 10 megawatts, like that's going to be figured out. And we have an emerging model of direct load control that's showing a lot of promise at the smallest, at the residential scale, for space heating, water heating, and deferring EV charging. The space that has so much potential, but at least to what I can see, does not have a strong model right now, is for the commercial sector. Barak, you mentioned like doing a lot of research there right now. I'm really interested to see what are the technologies, what is the program model, how do you overcome some of those challenges of customization and integration that are required for working with building automation systems. I think to my sense, we don't have that model right now, and there's so much potential there if you all could come up with it.
And I can add to his question that how do you take into account the heterogeneity of commercial customers? Because you can have an hospital, you can have a garage, you can have a grocery store, all are operating differently. So how can you manage or can you represent their specification in that models?
A lot of questions for you, Brock.
That's a tough one. So, and the correct answer is right now we do not, and we only work with office buildings. And I have a new project starting with small bank branches and stuff. But do I want to shed loads in a hospital? Maybe not now. Yeah, maybe, yeah. But I think there are lower hanging fruits, and like it's just so much easier to convince the facilities management of my university or other universities to do something like this than a hospital. I think it's just I think it also comes down to how much load do we need to clear from the grid, and how much is enough, and where do we stop?
To answer your question, yeah, at HQ, our supply plan is relying a lot on DSM or demand response program. We have dynamic rates for residential customers. We have demand response for our commercial customers, and we have industrial interruptible or curtailment programs for our industrial customers. But I think that with costly new production infrastructure, or yeah, as you mentioned earlier, that purchase from imports from Ontario or New York or United States are very pricey. Demand response is a tool that helps to balance the supply and the demand at a lower cost than building new supply or imports. So this is quite important.
I also want to ask a question. I mean, we might have covered it briefly, but I just want to get a ballpark figure in terms of, because I've heard arguments sometimes that, you know, residential maybe is not going to get you that much, or do you feel that there is an equal weight to residential when it's aggregated to commercial and industrial customers? Do you have
In designing our rates, or
like on the impact of
The impact in general.
or the grid? Like, would you say that it's equal impact, or it's still the commercial and industrial that would actually make?
Yeah, this is different because industrial loads are base, so they are there all year long. But for when you look at the residential consumption, there is the presence of space heating that caused the peak event in January, February, or December. So in terms of a peak reduction, when it comes from residential or industrial, this is the same value, because we want to give the incentive based on our marginal costs. So suppose that our marginal cost is $100 per kilowatt. We don't give all the $100 because customer responds to 50. So it remains some cash to do programs, to make other incentives, devices, technology that helps customer to reduce his peak demand. So we work on both sides, credits and not penalties, but credits when you curtail, and programs when to help customers to invest in technology or implement some peak reduction measures.
But maybe to just clarify, to clarify the point a little more, just again, because I've heard that argument before, but like, you know, when we talk a lot about the residential, it's maybe too much effort, you know, when to get to a critical mass of residential customers, compared to, let's say, if you work with a university, for example, or like just one. So I think that was more out of curiosity. Do you feel that, or is there a trend even within HQ that, you know, you have a more interest in working with the handful, or like not just handful, but maybe like the fewer commercial customers compared to residential to make an equal impact?
No, I think that all of our customers are important in terms of peak reduction, because the electric vehicles are getting higher, so people charge when they return home after work. This is not the good time to do that. Yeah. Focusing after 8 p.m. maybe. So that we for residential customer, there is a peak load that is coming very big.
So
but
it's more for anticipating for the future. It's more like anticipating for the future, because
but there is now, because of the space heating. So to answer your question, every megawatt counts. From commercial, residential, or industrial customers, we are focusing really on demand response to balance our supply and demand at the peak time.
For my part, I think before having this conversation, I would have responded to your question with skepticism about the ability of the residential sector to scale to the level of importance of like industrial demand response. But actually having had this conversation, like that 200 megawatts that HQ is getting from those residential customers, that's really impressive, and to me puts that very much on the same playing field.
So yeah, times run fast. So yeah, Brock.
This is more of a tangent. Can we go on tangents or like?
Yeah,
You know?
we have like 5 minutes.
All right. So I'm just curious about how what your reaction to Ontario or New York going through electrification and you know, lots of people in Ontario adopting heat pumps and electric boilers and stuff. So right now there's this perfect mismatch between winter peaking, summer peaking. I wonder what will happen, because Ontario peak is 22,000 megawatts, 23,000 megawatts, and Quebec is 40,000, and Ontario's population is about twice as much as Quebec. So if they go full blown like electric space heating, like looks really kind of scary from where I stand, and like I'm just curious and how it looks from Hydro-Quebec's.
Not really tension, Burak, actually. This was my next question and my last question. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, they are summer peaking, so we're correct, since we are winter peaking utilities. But yeah, we signed 2 long-term contracts with the United States, one to Massachusetts and the other one to New York. I think that we will supply those new demand on that side, but you know that maybe I'm not on the supply side at HQ, so I cannot talk for them, but maybe the level of our exports will maybe getting lower in the next few years. So this is the thing that I might expect.
I might add, if I may add, like my last question was for the future with all these electrification plans. How do you see like the evolving of demand response? Like, do we need like new products, maybe especially for EV charging? I think in Europe, some utilities are now deploying this, or maybe we need like some national policy, like overall Canada. Like, can we learn something from Inflation Reduction Act, for example, in the state, and how this encourage demand response, like on federal scale? So, like, I would like to hear like from everyone for this last question.
Yeah, this is I think that this is the question. Yes, peak time demand response will be part of our rate offer, program offer, and we will focusing on peak demand because just told us earlier that we passed from an energy mitigation to a peak mitigation, and with the electrification, the base load will get higher, but I think that the peak load will getting much higher than that. So we have to have a bunch of tools to manage the peak. With technology, I think that technology could enhance the curtailment per customer because it's automated. So it's not based on behaviors. So the contribution is more efficient at that point.
Do you think we need a new products for EV charging, as like special design for EV charging?
Yes, because the government objectives are quite strong. I think that it reaches 200,000 vehicles by 2035, I think. So this is a lot, and this will cause a big impact on our grid and on our peak time.
Yes.
I guess I agree with everything Frédéric just said. And I guess when I think about it in the context of like the Canada 2050 goals, a lot of the technologies that we're talking about, less so at the residential scale, but when we're talking about commercial building technologies, if we're talking about boilers or chillers or large heat pumps, there's going to be one time that equipment gets replaced between now and 2050, right? And so the opportunity to do that in an efficient way and in a way that that technology is, has communication and control functionality, we get that shot once. And that's, it's a funny way of answering your question, but I think that's a really important imperative when thinking about some of the more significant loads on the system.
Mohammed?
Sorry, can you just, I was just reading the question on them.
Okay, yeah. We will go to the question. Like,
Alright.
this was my last question, and then we will go to the audience question.
So, I didn't finish the question. I think I failed to do both, but could you rephrase your question?
Yeah, my question was more on the future and
A future. I don't know, man. But like, I think things will be in demand response would probably operate in a more transactive way than like it would be more like Hydro-Quebec telling clients like, oh, I need to shed X many megawatts, and people like bid it, and
that's an interesting idea actually.
Then like, right now, like if we get to the like automation infrastructure that enable that level of interaction, I think that probably is the long-term future. I'm not sure when we get that, but well, it will be fun to watch. So I mean,
It would be fun to watch.
I'm from the generation of like, Back to the Future, so I'm still waiting for the flying.
So Mohammed, one last word.
I think all the points that were raised are pretty much along the lines of what I'm thinking. I think in general, like demand response will probably be critical in those cases. I do think that there's huge potential. This is kind of why I was asking about the importance that's placed on residential versus other types of customers. I do feel that, with commercial and so on, with building automation systems, it should be feasible, at least technically speaking. With residential customers, I think, at least on the personal level, that there's a lot of potential still there. And a lot of it would only work out if people are better educated, more involved. Like, there's a lot of things about getting occupants in the loop, which is kind of why we're, again, on the personal level, interested in that topic, because I think a lot of the programs might not scale as well if we don't understand how people are going to react, and going from 200,000 to the 4 million or so on. Like, again, what does it take? How you need to get to deal with a lot different kind of people that are not the early adopters, if you may, that are taking it in place now. So yeah, I think that there's more to be done on getting it to be more individualized and tailored, customized programs, which again, I think on the technical side, I think should be feasible, might need some upgrades in communicating, like smart thermostats and things like that, but it's feasible.
So that's a great end for our discussion with a lot of hope on demand response. So I think we can turn to our audience and we see their question. My laptop decided to die now, so. Yeah, we can start maybe, from the floor first, and then, we can start from the floor first.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Great discussion. My name is Masoud. I'm a fellow researcher here at Concordia as well. What I'm doing is pretty close to what Dr. Oof and Dr. Burak are doing here, which is try to understand the effective occupant and try to mimic their behavior so that you can incentivize them better and create better programs. The topic that the question that I want to mention was kind of covered here and there, but I want to address it more specifically, more from the industry affiliated panelists here. Of course, I'll be happy to hear the other panelists' idea here as well. The effect of occupant behavior in and their participation and the way they are educated was covered pretty much here and there in our conversation. But what I'm more interested to know is how does the industry look at the occupants, or how well are they understood, you would say, from your part? It's kind of similar to your question, Frederick, with how do you mimic the heterogeneity of the occupants from your perspective when you're looking at these stuff? I can cite one story here is regarding the winter credit program. In our house, we, like my roommate and I, which is a fellow researcher sitting here as well, we both like it cold. We are not that big energy consumers. And when I opted into the winter credit score, I think there is a minimum reduction for the credit to kick in. And we were never able to achieve that, I don't know, 2 kilowatt hour reduction for it to start kicking. And that meant kind of we never participated. We did get the reduction that we would have gotten with the same rate, but not the credit. So I guess in short, my question is how does the industry look at the heterogeneity, the occupants, and their lifestyle, their characteristics? Of course, these the statistical analysis that you have, like how many percentage are this, that, and the other, that comes into play as well. But this is what I want to know from all of the panelists, more specifically the industry guys. Thanks.
I'll begin.
Yes, great question.
That's a hard
Yeah,
question.
a hard question, yes, in fact. But when we design any new rates or options or programs, we do make focus group. So we had in 2017 focus group with residential customers and small commercial customers to implement our dynamic options. A bunch of customers told us that it was very difficult for them to shift their loads because on the commercial part, I said, because my business opens at 10 after the peak event, or I want that my customers feel comfortable in my space. So this is the kind of questions or feedback that we had from our customers to design the offers. For your more specific case with the 2 kilowatt per hour threshold, this is because the way that the option is built, there is an error margin that we have when we try to calculate the curtailment you provide to us. But we are constantly reviewing our methodology. Maybe that threshold will disappear someday, but this is the mark that we have to ensure that there is no white noise or something like that come up with the options. And maybe after that we can talk about how you set your thermostat or set point when you get the peak event on the morning of the night. So maybe we can talk about that after that.
I don't have a lot to add beyond just adding to the point that I think the small commercial sector is particularly challenging because of the heterogeneity and not having enough size to justify significant investment to understand kind of at the individual building scale. But otherwise, Frederick is more the expert here.
Okay. Any other question from the audience side?
Actually, it's on? Okay. Sorry, I will present myself as well. I'm a PhD candidate from Polytechnique Montréal, and I work mostly with ground source systems. So, but also with like reducing peaks. So that's also one of my objectives of the research. And so I had just like I just noticed also during my research that the preheating and pre-cooling and stuff like that has really much of impact. So I just noticed that, for example, you were talking about reducing like maybe half degree or 1 degree. That okay, that is not noticeable for the comfort point of view, but if you just like preheat or pre-cool, you don't even have to actually go beyond the threshold, like below the threshold, comfort threshold at all. So I think at that point maybe you do need like a smart thermostat or smart thing. So what I was thinking that could be interesting to have, it's like I also have the Hydro-Quebec application. It's quite cool, and I like it. And maybe there it could be like a kind of a, how to say, try to speak to customers and make them aware of the impact they could have, both on the CO2 point of view or other things. And there maybe opt in to some kind of demand response program. At that point, I don't know how much it's could be difficult to implement on large scales this type of smart devices. So that's one of the questions. Like if you have some plans about this thing. And then another question I had is, like also on my bill, for example, I noticed that the fixed rate is much more impactful on my bill rather than the variable. The variable is like 6 cents kilowatt hours, is very low. But the fixed on a residential scale, maybe it's the fixed amount per month is more impactful. So maybe I'm wondering if something could be done, like also to reduce that, if the customer allows some demand response. So for example, I don't know, we can like remove $2-3 from the fixed if you do this or in this moment or something like that. And I don't know, maybe, okay, this is already two questions, but just a third one. And about EVs, electric vehicles, I see that the discussion was more about like negative points. So, okay, the customers will charge when they come back from home. But actually there, I think there is like kind of an opportunity with the vehicle to grid options. So that's also, I was thinking that maybe when they can return home, they can, instead of charging the car, they could decharge the car, because they don't need maybe the 400 kilometers of range in one day. So you could decharge a car during the peak and then during the night charge the car again.
Yeah, okay.
Too much questions.
Too many questions.
Can I start at the end?
Yeah.
Vehicle to grid is really interesting. It's a great, it sounds super cool. I heard about vehicle to grid for the first time when I was in grad school in 2007, and it sounded like an amazing idea. And 15 years later, in 2022, I had still never seen it real and working in the world. But this is a better, more hopeful story than that, because in Nova Scotia, they have vehicle to grid up and running. It's working. We're seeing the KW flowing back and forth. So I was amazed that was real and finally came about, because, like you say, the potential there to just have, thousands of large batteries plugged into the system at all times is really massive. So really excited to see more of those projects, and what the receptivity from both the car manufacturers and the charging infrastructure providers is like as that starts to develop.
Now I'm very curious to know more about what vehicle to grid in Nova Scotia actually. But
there's not very many of them, but they're working.
Yeah.
To answer your second question, if am I right, if you said that the base rate as a fixed component. This is the access charge, which is represent all of cost of service cost and not cost of customer costs and a part of the network. So there is no related to how much you consume your electricity. There is only a variable charge for rate D. So if we wanted to implement a fixed charge based on your maximum power demand of the month, this is a way to do it, but as I said before, people don't know how much what are their peak demand of the month because they only rely on the energy concept. So on your assumption that you can take $3 for the fixed charge, the impact will be zero because HQ will have to recover those costs on the variable way energy component. So,
but this would be helpful for low-income households or people who can't reach this threshold, as one of the audience asked.
but
So
when we design rates, we do not point that you're low-income customers or you live in a McMansion or something like that. We base our rates on costs, and this is the prerogative of the government to help low-income customers to have the air for their electricity consumption or something like that. We don't. This is not a principle that we use to make rates or to create them. So this is the social way to help people with low income to get some fresh air. And your first question was
preheating. I think this is for Mohammed more.
And preheating and yeah. Yeah, yeah. The way to participate to the main response when the winter credit option or the flex rate D, it's to preheat your home. But with the flex D, this is measurable data because when the peak time starts, all kWh will be billed at 50 cents, and after that, the kilowatt hour will be billed at the lower price. But on the winter credit option, when you preheat, you will be billed at the rate D. But yeah, you will have a threshold. Your consumption will be above the threshold, but the thing is, the threshold is there when the peak period arrives. So you have to set the reference at enough level that represents not only curtailment. So if you do nothing, if your load profile is currently that size before the event and when the event arrives, this is how we measure the curtailment. Is that clear? Or
yeah.
No, but this is how the flex works. But the winter credit option is the comparison of a reference and the real load.
And the reference is a big question then.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Personally, yeah, I spend a lot of time trying to understand the reference and how you. But yeah.
We can go deep on that after.
Yeah. Sure.
I'd like to ask him how that's measured. But just I just want to talk very briefly about the first question on preheating and pre-cooling as well. I mean, I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but I think one of the things we've noticed when we're looking at data from a lot of houses, not in Quebec in this case, is that, you know, like preheating and pre-cooling is good to maintain comfort during the event. So the question is like how much preheating and how much pre-cooling you need to do. And that's a function usually of the house itself, right? Like if you're in an apartment versus in a big house that has like nothing detached to it and so on. So part of this is, you know, what we're interested in as well as Burak is, you know, if we can, and there are ways to do that, if we can try to sort of estimate how long it takes or like how much preheating is suitable for house A versus house B based on how fast it loses heat or how fast it, you know, gains cooling or whatnot. So based on its thermal envelope or thermal characteristics, preheating can be done differently. And this is part of this individualization or customization that we're talking about. It's more that you cannot treat every house the same. Not everyone or not every house would respond the same to a 1 hour or 2 hours of preheating. Some of them might need more, some of them might need less. And this is part of, you know, what could be done with more data available, with access to that, and with ways to simplify the modeling of a house and how it responds, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Does that
So
answer your question, I hope?
we have to go to, yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Maybe we can, yeah,
we
after.
can chat later.
Yeah, I think that's it from the audience side. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we can have.
Can try to respond quickly.
Okay, I'm Connor. I'm a PhD student here as well, with Mohammed actually. And so I'm going to direct my question to the industry people as well, just because I talk to these other guys all the time. One thing I found interesting is you said that now demand response is actually in the plan for Hydro Quebec as far as like how the grid is going to continue operating, I guess. So just very generally, I'm curious, is there like kind of a more dire aspect to this? Is there projections that the grid load is going to be much larger than we can handle unless we bring some of this in? And in that way, right now we've all talked about how like maybe we don't care that much about demand response because it's only $50 of savings, but is there a time we're like kind of heading to, unless something better happens, that it's going to get very dire, things are going to get very expensive unless we're starting to produce, or it's starting to go in the direction of demand response?
Well, you have to know that since HQ is regulated by the Régie de l'Énergie, and every year we have to convince them that our 10-year forecast are well achieved. So supply meets demand, and if not, we must fulfill the gap with call for tenders or new production assets or something like that. So yes, we in this forecast we see that demand goes like this: electrification, decarbonization, EV are aspects that pushes up the demand, and regardless of the economic activity that goes up as well. So our supply plan is focus on energy efficiency because we have a lot of goals on that way. So it reflects the base load that we want to stabilize or even decrease, but we also focus on peak demand. So we are implement programs in both areas of our activities. Does that respond to your question, or?
Yeah, it's a very general question.
Okay.
I guess I was just a very positive conversation. I find those kinds of things, but also a very like dire situation we're in a little bit. Like, climate change
Yeah, actually, this was is also.
No, but you have to know that, as I mentioned, if we see a gap between the supply and the demand long time enough before, we can build new things, call for private sector to do much more wind, solar. It could be name it on the other generation products that will come up with new generation space. So yeah, we have to balance the supply and the demand for our period, our 10-year period.
Actually, this was one of the question online also, that like with increasing climate change effect, like he anticipates that more people will depend more on EC usage or like heat pump. So like why you bother with residential or demand response if you are like expanding the grid or spending more money on the grid is inevitable. So I think you already answered this question more or less.
Yeah, I think broadly, like you said, we're focused here, we're talking about demand response, so we're talking about the demand side, but insofar as electric loads are growing in a really massive way, it's a demand question, but it's also a supply question. And there are definitely rooms elsewhere where people are having the supply conversation. I mean, what you call dire, like natural gas power plant developers call opportunity, right? Like this is, but it really varies by jurisdiction. One thing we're seeing, like Ontario, California, the Maritimes, like nuclear generating stations that 5 years ago were scheduled to come offline this decade are getting refurbished and extended. There's a lot of conversation in Ontario right now about, can we decommission gas facilities? Oh, do we need to build new gas facilities? Like it's pretty jurisdiction specific, that supply versus demand question. So demand is one component, but very much not the whole thing.
Okay, so to go for online questions quickly. So first question is very interesting actually. So what do people think about potential for increasing demand flexibility participation upstream or at the point of sale? So for example, with every purchase of EV or hot water tank, it comes with a demand flexibility education and opt-in agreement for customers. Like you somehow like you connect this together. You connect the consumption with the agreement and opt-in in the demand response directly in the same agreement or in the same purchase.
Could every thermostat be a communicating thermostat, open ADR ready? Could commercial buildings similarly, like what do we need to do in terms of the BAS to make like off the shelf integrations?
Yeah, I think they speak more about like when the user go and buy an EV, he also has to sign in an opt-in agreement for demand response and get some education on how to like charge and how to respond to demand response events. Or when you buy a heat pump or I don't know, like a water heater, you have to go through and like not go through education, but at least like get some education. And do you think like this will open a new potential for the utility?
Yeah.
What's the question is for you actually?
This is a good question, and of course, like we said earlier, it's all around marketing and literacy and how can people get educated by the way the better consumption is. Maybe it could be when you buy, like you said, an EV, you have this option that you could save, or you have the incentive to push back your recharge after 8 p.m. or because it's better for the grid and you get maybe a lower price at that time. So in United States, California, there is a lot of time of use rates that helps EV owner to recharge at the right moment for the grid, and those people are getting some savings on their bill. So again, this is the response, the behavior response to price signals that can help people to save, to adopt good behaviors. But you mentioned that this is an opt-in option.
Yeah.
It could be opt-out, or it could be mandatory. We are not we're not right there with the mandatory, because it could harm some low-income customers, or even any customers that do not respond well to the price signal. But the better the better response that we can have is someone that goes by himself to the option. So the opt-in still remains the better way to get good results from the options.
And this would bring us to second question, which is more on the awareness part. And like, I want to rephrase the question somehow. So he thinks that a good start would be by defining first what is energy for consumer and how it is produced, and like make them more they understand it, more they likely they will engage in the discussion. I would rephrase this, or like, who do you think should be also in this table, like to represent the customer? If we have like the academia and consultancy and utility, who else should be here and to bring awareness to the customers?
Device manufacturers, like the ones in, yeah, product manufacturers. They make the products, but their marketing budgets are also so much bigger than DSM marketing budgets, and they're in homes, they're recognized brands. So their ability to reach people and change attitudes is probably a lot greater than most of ours. And the ability to engage that industry and bring them to these conversations, their goals are not always our goals, but where you can find points of alignment, I think could be really significant.
That's a great point.
I would just add also, people that we're trying to understand behavior, but as engineers, I think there's people that are better educated for that, like sociologists or someone that actually understands a little better consumer behavior and things like that, that I think could be a good add. And I did like that idea of making, it's almost like doing the advertisement with any sale of any large appliance or large equipment. That I think can increase awareness, at least, of the program, even if it's an opt-in, even if it's something that's not mandatory or anything. But I find that one of the problems was that a lot of people are not aware, because you have to like sort of be engaged and go on Hydro-Quebec websites, and why not or like be someone that has a bit of a motivation to do something, versus if every time you're trying to buy anything, like any large dishwasher or like EV or whatever, or thermostat, it becomes something that you're informed about, and even if you don't have to choose it, I think that's...
I was gonna say behavioral economist, but maybe that's you.
Yeah, so that's it. I think this is the last question, is how Hydro-Quebec is tackling the problem of uptake costs for the end consumer. For example, like, do you have other initiatives for like taking some part of the cost for smart devices, envelope, or building retrofit, or like things that can help people participate in this?
Yeah, we do have some programs that could help people to get some devices. A few years ago, there was the program called Mieux Consommer, which you was at the Rona and purchase a old thermostat, and you get a credit of I don't know, I don't remember the price, but the more you buy, the more you can save. So that was part of the Mieux Consommer program at that time. We are still looking for new programs like Energy Star, Windows, anything that residential people can have in their home to help them to lower their energy costs. So yeah, I'm working on the right design side, but I have some colleagues that works on programs too, and yeah, this is very important to help people to get the devices to better response to our peak events. And also you have the Quebec government that has programs, Chauffer Vert, or something like that could help people, mostly residential, to implement some measures or to buy some efficient windows or our installation that helps them to reduce their energy consumption.
Yeah, you want to add something? Yeah, I think with this we end up our events today. Thank you for accepting our invitation and giving us all this helpful information, give us this really wonderful discussion. And thanks audience for being here today. And thanks also for the audience who participated so online. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks again, and just a reminder that the recording of this event will be posted on our YouTube channel now. So that is available for all of you if you want to relive this event. And we're going to be closing the Zoom momentarily. Thanks again. Have a good evening.